Hey guys, welcome to the Friday night live stream of the Adventure Photo Show. I'm Steve Richert, adventure photographer and filmmaker in relative suburban exile as I'm studying for a nursing degree. And in this episode, or this live stream I guess, tonight, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the third photo challenge that we are doing here together, and share a little thoughts and feedback about kind of how everything has been going so far with that. And I also want to talk to you guys a little bit about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. I actually got a request. I got some questions about my diet and kind of how diet and health and fitness, how some of that actually interfaces with doing creative work, because in my life anyways, the places that I've traveled and the climbing and the time that I've spent exerting myself physically has always had a lot to do with why I wanted to capture those moments with a camera, and the fact that I had to work hard to get to the top of mountains, for example, or on various types of outings, really made those moments, the sacrifice that I put in physically to get there, it made them more worthwhile for me to capture them. And really that started my love of photography, was really climbing and being outdoors. So I think there's some relationship there. That's what I would like to talk to you guys about tonight for the next 30 to 45 minutes. I'm not going to do a marathon session tonight. Hello, Tiff. Hello, Ricky. Glad to have you guys here. And of course, if you guys have specific questions, I'm happy to address and take specific questions as well about any of that stuff. But before we get into talking about kind of diet, fitness, and kind of how that impacts photography, I want to talk a little bit about the photo challenges that we've been doing here. Up to this point, we've been doing photo challenges on Twitter and on Instagram. So using the hashtag LV photo challenge, and you can look back at some of the videos that I've made about these first two. And the first photo challenge was doing manual focus only. Second photo challenge, which is what we're kind of wrapping up at this point, is doing self-portraits. And it's been really awesome. I've been really excited to see you guys and the work that you've been doing on both Twitter and Instagram. And being perfectly honest, like where I'm at right now, I didn't upload any videos this week, and kind of the Friday night thing is like, that's the one thing that I can do regardless. But this week I didn't upload any videos because I've been really busy. Busy kind of publishing a documentary project that I have been working on for the last couple of months, and something that is pretty near and dear to my heart. I've talked about it a decent amount here on these live streams. And so since I've been publishing that documentary project, still photography at this point, and I have a video component that I'm going to share with you guys here on the Living Vertical channel once I'm finished editing that. But that's been taking up a little bit of my time, and so I haven't been able to, publish or upload the videos here that I would like to. So I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of say, I'm sorry I wasn't able to upload anything this week, but I would like to kind of conclude the self-portrait challenge, because I feel like that has been difficult. Like, we exerted ourselves creatively. I know for myself, like I feel like I was pushed a bit, and I think that from some of what I've seen and heard on Twitter, it seems like, you guys really were having to dig deep and push yourselves a little bit too. And I think there's a point to which that's good, but there's also a point to which we just want to be able to have fun with our camera. I felt like it was definitely harder work. And good evening to you, Yusuf. I'm glad to see you here, and always glad to see your portrait. And I finally got to see a full-on portrait of Tiff on Twitter, which really warmed my heart. And because I kind of fell behind checking the LV photo challenge hashtag on Twitter, it took me like a day to see that, but I was really excited to see that she got after it and did like a full-on proper self-portrait. That was really cool. But yeah, I definitely felt like this challenge was work, much more so than the first challenge. So I wanted to do something a little bit. Well, first of all, I wanted to make sure that my inability to upload a new video didn't translate to like a whole entire week elapsing where this challenge was kind of dangling out there and whatnot. So I wanted to use this video as an opportunity to kind of announce the next challenge, which hopefully I'll be able to get back on the wagon and do some videos for next week. But honestly, I have a lot of stuff shot that needs to be edited, so rather than try to shoot more new stuff, I'm kind of at this point where I feel like kind of the smaller videos that are more internal interest, that are like things that we're doing just internally as a community, those are things that I would rather handle in these live streams, and that at least just for the time being, so that I can really work on editing some of the, I have a couple of mini docs that I've been working on like forever. I have one about my family and my dad's story that I started like last spring. Also last spring, my brother, when I was down logging with him, I shot a bunch of stuff down there that I didn't put together yet. And then I have two sort of mini episodes from the time I was up in Canada. One is about photography with Martin's dad. You may remember Martin, and his dad is like 87 years old, I believe. He's former head of search and rescue for Parks Canada, and this guy, he's 87 years old, and he gets after it. He's probably the most inspiring person that I know because of the fact that he's so old and he still gets after it. And we actually repeated a climbing route that he put up. Martin and I did. Hey, good evening, Carlos. Good to see you here. Martin and I repeated a route that he put up when he was our age. He established it, and like nobody had climbed it for like 30, 40 years. And we went back there with him, and he actually hiked with us like up a very steep, I mean, it was kind of insane. Anyways, I got some cool stories in the works, and what I want to be able to do is, just keep you guys posted, so if you're not seeing like new uploads all the time as consistently as possible, or as consistently as in times before, it's not that I'm like, distracted or what have you, So playing catch up, I think, is important. And also, this is something that maybe I'll save for later in the live stream, but I'm like really battling this desire to get a new camera, which I absolutely don't need. I absolutely don't need it, but I really, really want it. And this time of year is always a big struggle for me because we're close to Thanksgiving, Black Friday stuff, and like it's bad. It's really dangerous. Okay, so the next photo challenge, what we're going to be doing, or what I would like to do, is motion. So I would like us to focus on something that's a little bit more open-ended, just capturing motion, and specifically like blur, softness, unsharpness. That's really the idea that I have for this this next photo challenge. And again, on Instagram, on Twitter, LV photo challenge is the hashtag that we're going to be using, and we're going for unsharpness. And my desire with a lot of these photo challenges is to be able to take things that more often than not we look at as a negative or something that we want to avoid, and commandeer that negative thing for our own purposes and learn how to turn that into a creative device that can be interesting or useful. And I think that longer exposures, whether, there's a variety of different ways that, and I'll just kind of throw this out there and you guys can do what you want over the next week or two as we go through this photo challenge. You can do double exposure. So I've seen some things done with double exposures or multiple exposures that are just instead of doing like two completely separate scenes and overlaying them with a multiple exposure, doing almost the exact same shot but just reframing it just a tiny bit so that the second exposure doesn't lay flush over the first, and it creates almost like an effect of like a painting. And I've seen some really, really cool stuff. And one of the things I've seen from you guys, I feel like you tend to do things that are a little bit abstract in some cases. And this is one of the reasons why I love interfacing with other photographers and why this community is so important to me is because a lot of the stuff that I do, I have a hard time seeing outside of the very realistic and direct, like documentary style is the way that I've always shot. And so there are a lot of times when I get a lot of inspiration from seeing you guys do stuff. And one of the things just recently, even in my own fairly straightforward documentary style of shooting, when I was in Canada with Martin, I shot that video, which was mostly made up of stills with the X100F, the Fuji X100F, which I have video shot that I have to put out about that because I meant to kind of give that a little bit of a review to tell people how I like it, because it's pretty awesome. I do love the X100F. But shooting with that camera on a day out in the mountains, I found myself dragging the shutter a lot, using longer exposures to kind of have something that was different than just like, this is me here, this is Martin there, this is us going here and doing that, but like really to convey some sense of movement and action, because when all you have is a lot of really great scenery, but it all looks kind of the same after, you know, the first 5 shots, the people become a lot more important, and being able to translate the activity and the action of those people using slower shutters and you know, particularly on the X100F, the fact that it has a built-in neutral density filter so that you can maintain a well-balanced exposure while slowing that shutter down to get the motion blur is super handy. But anyways, that's one of the things that really got me thinking about it. Good evening, Jason. Good to see you here. That's one of the things that kind of got me thinking about that. And that's another way, of course, that you can, you know, create some of that unsharpness. And certainly in post, you can do that. Bokeh or bokeh, and throwing backgrounds and throwing things very dramatically out of focus is another way that you could do that. And those are the 3 that come to me off the top of my head, although I'm sure there are others. But I'm interested to see what we can, you know, kind of do when we put our heads together a little bit and try to do something that focuses on blur, motion blur, and unsharpness, basically, and using that thing that we typically think of as negative when we use that with intention. And I think that's what really most of this stuff comes down to. It's like using it with intention. And for that matter, the self-portraits that we were doing, I think that's one of the things that makes the selfie, you know, the whole like bathroom mirror with the phone up here thing, or actually no, bathroom mirror with the phone here while we're standing and flexing, right? That's the, you know, that's what makes it so offensive, is the fact that it is not really that deliberate. It's something that is not done with intention. It's something that's done without thinking, and it's that, you know, act of creating something with no thought of the audience or the way or the aesthetics of how that thing lands on the audience, that is just so, you know, it seems almost rude when, at least to me, when I see people like on Instagram, if I notice that somebody has posted, you know, if I'm looking at their grid on Instagram, I go to their profile and I see more than like 1 or 2 selfies. I mean, sometimes I'll be generous if it's somebody that I have somewhat of a personal relationship, but I've unfollowed people that I'm close friends with, but because like if I see a bunch of selfies on there, it's like, no, you're not putting in any effort, and this, I just can't, you know, like, you want to have a cup of coffee with me, you want to have a conversation, we can get together in person and I'll talk to you, but I'm not going to follow somebody on Instagram that puts no effort into creating stuff. Anyways, I'll get off my soapbox. That's the next photo challenge, and I'm looking forward to it. And well, thank you, Matt. Good to see you here, and I appreciate that vote of confidence. It's funny because I teach in college. I teach first aid and CPR right now, as I am also taking classes in college towards my nursing degree. And, you know, I would love, like, if I could get paid, even as an adjunct, like, if I could get paid to teach photography in college, I would die 1,000 deaths. I would love it. And some people are like, oh, yeah, you should do that. And I'm like, well, I kind of already do. It's just I don't get paid for that. And I teach as a person who has intentionally rejected the label of professional just because of the baggage that carries with me, for me personally. Although I had a very interesting conversation with one of my friend's dads last night, who was like trying to convince me that I should still keep an oar in the water professionally with photography. And I realize that a lot of that is a lot of that is my own fear that has gotten me to kind of step away from at least having some involvement with professional photography. But right now, the big thing is that, like, from this point until New Year's, I really have to just focus on getting stuff done that I've already started. And I have the documentary project, which I didn't mention specifically, but if any of you guys haven't checked it out or are interested, if you go to my website, livingvertical.org, I have it's called Banting's Ghost. And right now I only have 2 images that populated, and I'm doing, because right now November is National Diabetes Awareness Month. Of course, I've had type 1 diabetes for a long time, almost 20 years, just a couple of months away from my 20-year anniversary living with this condition. And so I wanted to do a documentary project about about kind of some of the struggles that people living with this condition face because they have a hard time getting access to the medicine, insulin, which is a hormone that all of our bodies makes. And this is actually going to be a great segue into talking about diet and fitness component, because for me, type 1 diabetes is inextricably linked with my love of photography, because one of the things that is super important living with a condition, a metabolic condition like type 1 or type 2 diabetes, if other people have that, which is very common to have some form of it at some point in your life. Unfortunately, most people nowadays will encounter some version of that, and having some sort of physical activity, even if it's not like, really intense, crazy, forceful activity, having something that brings you joy, that enables you to become physically active, to live fully in your body, and to get out and experience the world is super, super important. And for me, photography has always been kind of that baseline level of activity where, I can't always be climbing, I can't always be lifting. Recently I haven't been lifting or climbing. I've been just kind of, I work out in the mornings a little bit when I wake up, but I'm not really doing anything very structured beyond that in terms of real fitness efforts. But I can always get out a couple of times a week and just take my camera and go walk for an hour. And it's not like I have to try to do that. If anything, that's something that I really look forward to doing. That's something that even if it's raining out or if it's kind of, I'm not super motivated, I'm down to do that because I love photography and I love walking. But the two of those things kind of really blend well for me. But anyways, that documentary project is at livingvertical.org, and my patrons have put in a lot of finances and time to support this project. And so for the month of November, I'm posting these little photo stories from some interviews that I've done with a handful of folks. And of course, the first image is a self-portrait that I took as part of the Living Vertical Photo Challenge here, and to kind of give my little snippet of the story, because I've been living with that condition for 20 years and I have turned down jobs, I've turned down opportunities to travel, I have intentionally made less money so that I could qualify for decent enough insurance. Like, I have rigged and reconfigured and restructured every component of my life, because if you make a little bit too much or your insurance is a little bit this way, or, there's a very fine line to walk where I would not be able to afford the medication that keeps me alive. Like, literally, I will die without it. So that's something that in a lot of ways I've been able to be successful with, but it's a big stress and a burden on people living with this condition, knowing that if you run out of medication, it doesn't matter how much food you have, because if you don't have this medication, you can't eat your food. And, of course, it's not like a completely extraneous medication. Insulin is something that everybody, hopefully watching this, your body is producing it. It's a hormone that we all need to live. It's just my body doesn't produce any. And so November, typically National Diabetes Awareness Month, a lot of it centers around symptoms and signs for people to look at when, because a lot of the signs and symptoms of either type of diabetes are concurrent with what you would just experience with like a flu or kind of some fairly generic illness. And a lot of times, especially the younger the individual, with juveniles, ergo juvenile diabetes, but I have the younger, little kids, a lot of times the symptoms progress much more quickly, and they're mistaken because little kids are always getting sick, you know, preschool and this and that. It's like a lot of times it's very, very sneaky, and if it's not diagnosed right away, little kids die every year because doctors are just like, oh yeah, just give them some, you know, cold medicine or whatever, just fluids, and, you know, call me after the weekend type of thing, and then they're dead. So it's really important to be aware of those symptoms and signs. And like, I'll do a mini PSA here and just say, anybody that has kids or knows somebody that has kids, if they're drinking a lot of fluids, if they have trouble with their vision, a lot of times it's not very drastic, significant, detrimental like type of incident. A lot of times it starts with something that is very flu-like, but it just doesn't quite go away. And with girls, specifically yeast infections, little girls, like a yeast infection is almost always one of the things that is a dead giveaway at like a very young age, is a dead giveaway that it's probably type 1 diabetes. I'm very sorry to hear that. There are a lot of people that really do struggle with it, and even people who have all the tools and resources struggle with it. Like, I struggle with it a lot. Like, depression has been something it's been a part of my creative process and part of my journey, and part of why I climb in the first place is to, you know, be able to cope with the burden on some level. But at the same time, I found that burden has, you know, that challenge has made me a lot stronger and been better for me in some ways. And that's not always an easy perspective to choose, because there are times when it doesn't feel that way, but I have to say, no, that is my choice. And you have to master your own will. So anyways, that's just a little bit about kind of the PSA, you know, be aware for that stuff, especially with little kids or even teenagers and even adults. I mean, Martin, who you've seen in some of my videos, he's also type 1. He was diagnosed when he was in college. I was 16 when I was diagnosed, so it's not always little kids. And there are some folks that are diagnosed with type 1, which is typically juvenile diabetes. They're diagnosed with that in their 30s and 40s and even 50s. So now what we have been seeing is we have older adults getting type 1, which used to be juvenile, and we have younger adults, usually due to sedentary lifestyle and lack of good nutrition and exercise, etc., younger adults now getting type 2 diabetes. And so everything is all confused and all over the place, and I don't have all the answers to any of that, but you know, I think it's a good thing to be aware of and put the discussion, to put the discussion points out there and to talk about it. And you know, the whole issue with drug pricing and the pharmaceutical medical equipment, that it's very complex and complicated, because it's all embedded with the government, with healthcare and all of that. And the truth is that I believe, and without going down the political, economic, social rant, as I will try to resist that anyways tonight, although I have been thinking about doing another channel, a different channel that is just more dedicated to some of my political, social commentary, and kind of philosophical debates and discussions and dialogues about things like that. But, you know, competition and freedom in the marketplace does pay significant rewards, and part of the problem is there are approximately 40 companies worldwide that manufacture insulin, and insulin was first discovered in 1921. The patent was sold for about $3 to avoid a situation what we have right now, where people have to set up GoFundMe pages because they can't just walk in to their, you know, Walmart and say, look, here's $100 even. Like, the insulin that I take costs about $1,000 a month for that prescription. And you know, this is not some new technology that was just invented. This is stuff that has been evergreen and tweaked a little bit, like very incremental improvements since the 1920s. And the reason why that patent was sold for $3 was because Frederick Banting, the man who, one of the co-discoverers, he said, insulin doesn't belong to me, it belongs to the world, and I don't want people to ever die because they can't get their hands on this medication. And so he sold each one of the 3 researchers that were at the head of the discovery of insulin, they each sold their share of the patent for $1. And today that situation has kind of metastasized into a really ugly business situation. And the thing is, I'm not even, like, I appreciate the industry, because without the industry I would not have good insulin to take, which allows me to live. But I think there needs to be regulations and competition so that the industry does not get too far up on its own high horse and price people who literally rely on their product to live, price them out of their ability to survive. And so the whole concept of a free market, it works really well as long as the market is free. But when you have people who literally are held hostage because they will physically die if they do not have your product for more than 24 hours, it's like saying, okay, let's have 3 companies in the United States control the air and they all fix the price of the air that you breathe. People would not respond favorably to that. Or with water. And there are some issues with water being controlled like that, specifically with the Nestle Corporation buying up a lot of water sources, but I digress. So you have people that are kind of held hostage because they have to have this product to live, and there are only 3 companies allowed to manufacture and sell this product within the United States, while there are approximately 37 other entities worldwide that make that same product, but that are not allowed to do business within the United States because of the lobbying dollars from these big 3, the trifecta, if you will, in the pharmaceutical industry, that says, oh, keep these guys out of here because this is our, there's good eating here for them, and they can kind of split that loaf. They fix their prices such that they're all about the same, relative level, and, there's enough meat on the bone for all of them. But other parts of the world where there's not enough profit margin for them, they don't want to really be bothered there. So there's other companies that serve India and like Southeast Asia and like sub-Saharan Africa and whatnot. And I bet that if some of those companies were actually given a crack at serving the market in the United States, I bet they could probably create some really useful competition. And also the other part of the thing too is that, it's not really a free market here, because of the fact that I know a handful of people that could crowdfund $1 million and set up a lab and start cooking insulin in like 6 months to a year, if the regulations weren't so insanely prohibitive to do that in this country with the way everything is with the FDA. So again, these are all big problems that don't have any simple solution, or I'm not under any misapprehension about the fact that my photography is going to change that. But starting a discussion or continuing to keep the human aspect of that problem in the forefront of people's minds, especially. And the big thing is the companies who really have the opportunity, or the organizations that have the opportunity to bring this discussion to a national level, are big research. It's the nonprofit community organizations. They have the opportunity and the lobbying availability in the government to be able to represent the community interests and to stand in the gap against industry abuses. And the problem is the nonprofit organizations they value their industry relationships way more than they do the community, in my opinion. And so ultimately everything that they're doing, they don't want to draw hard lines with the industry and say, look guys, this is unacceptable. Like, this is the red line. Insulin has now crossed $500. What is the point at which that price is too much? Is it $1,000? Is it $1,500? Is it $2,000? But somewhere there has to be a number that we would all agree on, where everybody just throws up their arms and says, nope, that's it, I'm done. Like, I can't sign off on this. I can't be party to this. Like, even on a corporate level, where people have to recognize that it's unconscionable. Like, it's wrong. And so yeah, I think really the bigger issue is really trying to hold the feet to the fire. It's like a trickle up effect, because the individuals within the community are, they kind of come together at this junction of like the nonprofit organizations who represent the community, but they actually have been really not doing their job for the community and kind of putting their needs aside and collecting the checks from the industry and enabling the industry to get away with that kind of junk. Good evening, Queen of San Joaquin. Good to have you here. So anyways, Tiff asked a question just a second ago, or a couple minutes ago, if local or national changes are preferable. That's a good question. I think that there are some, at least the way I see it, without trying to go through a whole overhaul or restructuring of the whole healthcare system, which I think is something that needs to happen as well. But I think that a big part of even that would benefit significantly from just creating a more diverse marketplace where there would be more competition, like simply allowing insurance companies to sell across state lines, health insurance. Like, you can buy most other kinds of products, goods, and services across state lines, but you can't buy health insurance. And so that creates, at least up till this point, that creates like one big barrier that really allows monopolization and prevents and prohibits smaller organizations and companies from leveraging the resources that they have to be able to serve a greater number of people. And I think that if they would remove some of the barriers to entry to where people could start manufacturing, and I know to a lot of people it sounds scary, but honestly, if I have to choose between worrying about dying because I can't afford my insulin if I lose my job, and like, I don't know how many people, like I literally know hundreds of people that are stressed out working jobs that they hate, jobs that are unhealthy for them and that are physically causing them to physically deteriorate, because if they lose that extra bit of their paycheck, they or their child will die because they won't be able to afford the insulin that they need. And so basically, if one was to create a situation where I had to choose between that type of scenario versus one where it's like, okay, a mom and pop insulin manufacturing thing where, okay, maybe the quality control isn't going to, and not to say that it wouldn't be there, not that there wouldn't be quality control, but to say that, like, I'm putting my trust in a small organization rather than putting my trust in FDA labels on a massive organization. Because at the end of the day, I would probably feel much more comfortable saying, look, I know this person who runs this company, who manufactures this insulin. I've been following them since they started the crowdfunding to get this out to the public. I trust their judgment, and I trust their ethical scruples and their abilities, and I've seen what they're doing. I don't need to have the FDA signing off on it, because honestly, the FDA signs off on crap all the time that still kills people. And in the meantime, we're just left with no options and no competition, rather than saying, you know what, let's let people with ability and good ideas get out there and let the buyer beware, let the buyer make an educated decision for themselves. And then we have the opportunity to say, hey, you know what, to these guys that are charging exorbitant amounts of money, to say, look, guys, we're not buying your insulin anymore. You have to bring it down to a price where it's worth it to me, where the market serves the consumer. And the problem is that it hasn't been that way up till this point. The consumer has actually been insurance companies rather than individuals. And instead of making these drugs saleable to an individual who makes $30,000 a year or $35,000, whatever kind of that, meaty part of the curve, what most people can say this is a reasonable price, they say, okay, well, we're dealing with these handful of insurance companies, and the insurance market has gotten smaller and more consolidated since so many insurance companies were not able to survive the Affordable Care Act implementation a couple of years ago. That basically consolidated, was a power grab for a handful of insurance companies. And so, now you have those companies that are the buyers, and that does a disservice because it allows the smaller your market of buyers, the higher the price is going to be for the insulin, and it creates just this insane relationship that's not really based in, it's not based in any real market availability that translates to individuals. Jason says the main issue, how do get cooperation sell a product for cheap if they don't have to or little competition? Yeah, there's very little competition, and in a lot of other, you have a couple of different options, right? You could have the government say, this is how much you are allowed to sell the product for, which is not very free market-y of them. And to me, I think there's merit to that, but I would prefer to see one in which you allow the companies that are manufacturing from India, that are like little mom and pop operations that are making products that are just as good and let them come in and say, look guys, we're going to give you a break on your insulin because you're a smaller company, you're newer to the game, we're going to give you a little bit of a leg up. And hey, by the way, Novo, Lilly, and Sanofi, those are the three big companies that are established here, the trifecta. You know, you guys need to get with the times, figure it out, because we're going to stop like holding the door shut on everybody else. I would prefer to see that rather than having the government say, you know, lecture these companies and say, put laws on them and say, oh, this is what you are allowed to sell it for. I think the market would take care of itself very well if there were, you know, options. So how one makes insulin, that is a kind of a long story. There are a few different ways that it happens. Originally, it was made from basically a tincture of ground bovine pancreas. Basically, they grind it up and let it, some sort of a centrifuge machine, I believe some alcohol and a few other chemicals. And I mean, it's not that complicated. Somebody with a little bit of chemical and laboratory know-how could do that. And I mean, in World War II and even in communist China over time, there were people who homebrewed their own insulin. I believe I think it was either Korea or China during the Korean War and the Chinese occupation. There was a fellow who made insulin out of rabbit pancreases, and it wasn't great, but it kept his wife alive. And there was a similar scenario in Europe. I believe it was in Germany during World War II. So it certainly can be done, and that is a far cry from like really good insulin, which is what we have the benefit of today. And that insulin is manufactured through basically it's genetic manipulation of E. coli bacteria. So like E. coli bacteria functions as like the main substrate, if you will. I think that's the right term, where it just grows and reproduces and multiplies so fast that you have all of this biological material, and then they take that E. coli and rearrange the chemical components of it to make it biosimilar to human insulin that's within the body. And the stuff that they can do with that insulin is amazing. It's really, really something. Like they can, you know, give it different types of action to where, you know, it'll work slower and it'll last longer, or it'll go faster and like survive at different temperatures within the body. And like there's all of these, I mean, what the industry has managed to do is really amazing. But the problem is that the competition isn't there to make it accessible to everybody else. So that is, yeah, I would love to see black market insulin, and honestly, I would just love to see more of kind of what we saw happen on some level. And this may not be a straight across analogy, but like Uber and Lyft and companies like that just, you know, disrupt the whole industry by saying, hey, we have a simpler, better, good idea to create more competition. And there still are taxi companies out there, but there are other options for people. And so now, you know, it's there's that competition that in the marketplace that would be useful. But you can't have that type of competition when lobbyists tie up the process of bringing a product to market in the first place. They tie it up with so much red tape that, you know, a handful of really smart people couldn't get a couple $1 million from investors and go out there and start making their own insulin. And you think about it, it's like there are people who know enough to do that. Why are they not allowed to do that? I would take that risk. There are many other people who would be willing to take that risk because there's a lot more accountability. I mean, frankly, I would be more likely to trust somebody who knows me personally and knows that I'm going to come find them if they sell me bad insulin. Whereas like with Novo, you know, like, or some of these other companies, I mean, they can just write everything off. They have a whole, you know, legal teams on retainer to deal with people that get hurt and sick. And, you know, so it's not like the alternative is really any better. Anyhow, what I want to do is to, Canada. Canada is a good option, and they're getting a little more expensive up there too. For most people, it's even worth it to fly or drive to Canada to just buy a whole pile of insulin and bring it back with you because it's so much. So for example, over the counter here, I got some insulin actually right here. Took a little dose. So I take two kinds. This one is like 24-hour insulin. This is kind of the basal insulin that makes everything else kind of work. This is in the background all the time. And this is my mealtime insulin that I take just whenever I eat a meal. So it works much like shorter duration, and then it's kind of out of my system. But these two insulins kind of have to work together to keep everything stable, both for short-term rises and also long-term. So you have the two different types of insulin. And this one is like $650 for a month's supply. Now, okay, so this is $650 for a month's supply. This is about $450 to $550, depending, because the price goes up and down on this one a lot. And you can sometimes get it cheaper in Mexico, but it's illegal to do that, which there again, create a little bit of competition and I know there are other things attached to that, but that would be a different way to bring the price down, and certainly some people do that. Like there are old folks bus tours that actually go to Mexico from San Diego that, like, I forget what the name of them is. One of my friends who lives in San Diego, he told me one time, I slipped my mind, but like they just go down to Mexico. It's like a pleasure cruise for older adults where really they're just going down to make pharmaceutical runs to the pharmacies down there, and then they come back with all their prescriptions filled and they save a bundle on it. But these two medications in Canada for a month's supply would probably be like $200 collectively, like $120 for one and $60 for the other, somewhere in that neighborhood. Whereas in the US, it's like $450 for one and like $650 for the other, for a total of $1,000. And frankly, like, these are good products. Like this stuff does, it's amazing. It enables me to live my life. Like I would gladly pay $150, $200 a month for that stuff. It's worth it. But when you're talking $1,000 a month, like, come on, like who can afford that? So that's kind of my pitch on the whole insulin thing. So anyways, what I want to do is just take a few minutes and talk a little bit about diet stuff, because Tiff actually asked me about this on Twitter earlier, and I'm going to give you a little bit of my thoughts about diet. And ironically, this is good. The insulin discussion is a good segue, because one of the things that enabled me to learn about my diet was the fact that I have diabetes. And so, like, when I check my blood sugar, however many times a day that I usually need to do that, that gives me really good feedback on how my body is handling food or how I'm doing. So I have a good measurement. For a lot of other people, when they're thinking about the way that they handle their diet, the way they interact with their diet, a lot of it really, the only feedback they get is weight loss. And weight loss takes a long time to happen, and it can also, there's so many confounding variables like water retention and sleep and stress and all these different things. And those things do have an effect on blood sugar as well, but blood sugar is a much more immediate variable that you get very quick feedback anytime I want. I can check my blood sugar and say, okay, here's how I'm doing. And so that became my connection or my metric for analyzing my diet, was to say, okay, how is this working in terms of my blood sugar? And one of the things that there was the cost of insulin, and like I didn't want to use a lot of insulin, and so I tailored my diet in such a way that I wouldn't have to use a lot of insulin because it was so bloody expensive. That was kind of how I approached all of this 20 years ago. And the other thing that I noticed is that when you take large doses of insulin, you have a much higher likelihood of having low blood sugars, because basically insulin is a hormone that enables your body to pull glucose or sugar out of the bloodstream and make it usable for the cells. I have actually written an ebook, if anyone is interested. It's about my journey with keto, the ketogenic diet, and type 1 diabetes on livingvertical.org on my website, in the store. It's like $9.99 or something like that, just a little ebook. And I'm always happy to talk, and I have a playlist actually that I did about and it's kind of specific to type 1 diabetics, but I've gotten a lot of people, like in my family. My sister's almost a general in the Marines. I forget what her rank is, but she's had 6 kids, 5 kids, 6 kids. She's had a bunch of kids. I'm a terrible person. I can't remember, and I just talked to her today. But she's got a bunch of kids, and like having to go through PT she kind of picked up on what I was doing with this diet, and it helped her immensely to kind of get back into fighting shape for her PT testing after having her last child, or her last two kids actually, because she did it twice. And my brother, being a logger and lumberjack, works harder, physically harder than literally any other person I've ever met, and he's an animal. And he's 7 years older than me. He's 40, well, 5, 7, 12, 42. He's 42. And I got him on this diet and revolutionized the way that he is able to work. And it's, so I just want to give a little bit of context for that, is like how I got to it was really managing my blood sugar. And insulin is a hormone that everybody's body produces, and basically the amount of insulin that your body is pumping out is in direct proportion to the amount of carbohydrates or sugar that you're eating. And what happens in some people that have type 2 is they eat so many carbohydrates, and their body is producing so much insulin. And there are differing opinions about this. Some people might disagree with this, but typically the view that I have heard the most about this is that, you know, your body produces so much insulin to metabolize those carbohydrates that eventually your body stops responding to insulin, and then you have to produce more and more, and then your body gets to the point where it just doesn't really respond to insulin at all, and you lose sensitivity. In much the same way that if you were to, you know, take any other kind of drug for example, like bodybuilders with testosterone, it's a different hormone, but same idea, that, you know, you have so much of that flooding your system that your body kind of loses its sensitivity and its own ability to regulate and produce and interact with those hormones in the first place. Or people who take like dopamine, I believe it's dopamine inhibitors, that create these, you know, the endocrine system is very delicate, and if you overstimulate or overblock certain types of hormones, it messes up the body's ability to just carry out basic functions like digesting a piece of bread. So the idea is that many people, by the time they get into their 30s and 40s, and it's happening younger and younger, they have consumed so much carbohydrate, and they have had such their insulin has been so upregulated through their diet and activity habits that they no longer are able to metabolize carbohydrates appropriately. And so that when they eat that piece of bread, instead of the bread turning into glucose that goes into the bloodstream and then transported out of the bloodstream into the cells, instead that you eat that same piece of bread, that glucose goes into your bloodstream, and it stays in the bloodstream, and it can't make its way out of the cells because the insulin that would normally pull that glucose out of the bloodstream and give it to the cells, that insulin is just like, it's not strong enough, it can't quite make that connection, and so you have higher levels of blood sugar. And this is called insulin insensitivity. And so the idea is that my assertion is that most people would benefit from down-regulating their insulin. And insulin is the principal hormone involved in gaining weight, because fat is stored through insulin, and muscle is also built through insulin, incidentally. So one of the reasons why, you know, a lot of times people have this idea that if you gain weight, it is, let me see if I can get this right, that there's an idea that people get diabetes because they gained weight. The reality is that gaining weight is actually the canary in the coal mine that says that they have already gotten diabetes. And because what happens is, as their body becomes less sensitive to insulin, this hormone that is responsible for storing glucose, they have to produce much more insulin. And so as they continue to complete that cycle of, like, you know, carbs causing spikes in insulin and always kind of fighting to balance the blood sugar through more and more insulin, it causes weight gain. And since it tends to happen gradually, more often than not, people think, oh, well, it's because you're lazy and you're not doing this and you're not doing that, and that's why, you know, you got diabetes. And so some people incorrectly blame people for, you know, giving themselves type 2 diabetes through weight gain, which is not really accurate. But the bottom line is that for everybody, and for myself included, my body produces no insulin whatsoever. So the only insulin that I have is fake insulin, fake news, right? Fake insulin. I inject myself with fake insulin, that is, a biosimilar. It's manufactured. Weight gain is usually often associated with other things, and the problem is that more often than not, people deal with the superficialities of weight gain without looking at the other hormonal and, things like certain lifestyle issues, but not necessarily that, oh, you need to go out and run more. It's like, well, why are you so tired that you don't have the energy to run? Maybe there are lifestyle things that are affecting the weight gain, but it's not as simple as like you just need to work harder. Maybe it's, sleeping more, because not having enough sleep increases cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone that causes the body to become much less sensitive, much more insulin resistant, and basically mimics the effects of type 2 diabetes. So if you're always tired and stressed, you're basically like have self-induced, not like blame, shame, self-induced, like it's your fault, but like where your body is physiologically mimicking and replicating the context and the symptoms of type 2 diabetes, even though you don't actually have type 2 diabetes, but because there's so much cortisol present, it creates that same feedback loop that upregulates the insulin. When you have upregulation of insulin, you have usually more cravings and more consummation of carbs, and then you have also more, I already said more weight gain, but then you have it becomes cyclical in nature. And so without going into great detail about, anymore, I guess that was kind of detailed. I could go on more about that, because every time I start unpacking a little bit, I realize there's something else attached to that I want to make sure that people understand. But the bottom line, if I had to kind of put this in a nutshell, is to say less insulin is better. Okay? If you can down-regulate your body's need for insulin, then I'm just reading some of the comments here. If you can decrease your body's need for insulin, then so much the better. And for me, it's a very straightforward process, because I can say, okay, here is my insulin pen, here is how many units are in it, and I can kind of do this. I can tailor everything to what I need based on the cost of this insulin, and based on the fact that every time I inject insulin, I know that if I don't eat the right amount of food, like if I eat too little food, then my blood sugar is going to go low. If I eat too much food, then my blood sugar is going to go high. And what I found is that, almost like with taking out a loan, that if I was doing very small doses of insulin and eating a very small amount of carbohydrate, that I was always able to balance that much better than if I had a lot of carbohydrate and a lot of insulin. And then if you get something even slightly off because you have so much carbohydrate and so much insulin, if there's a, if things start rocking, it's much easier for it to tip over and kind of get out of control. And so that's kind of how, between the cost and the desire to avoid those, precarious situations where my blood sugar went off the rails, and, I would, be like shaking and sweaty and couldn't barely walk and incoherent, like I was the other night when we were talking about gun control, because I hadn't eaten for like 3 hours. Imagine that like 10 times worse, and possibly while driving. That's the kind of situation you want to avoid, is kind of having a bad low blood sugar. And so the desire to avoid imbalances in my blood sugar and the desire to save money by using less insulin, those are the things that drove me to saying, okay, how can I basically reduce my insulin usage? Now, you guys don't have the advantage, if we could call it that, of taking your insulin externally, because your body is doing that for you. So you can't look at it and say, all right, how much insulin am I using? You have to kind of guess. I don't have to guess. I guess that's the benefit of being diabetic. But what I realized is that, I'm still hungry even though I eat. Well, first of all, actually, let's just make sure we establish what carbohydrates are. Carbohydrates are plant-based, period. There are no animal-based carbohydrates. So basically, protein, your macros, protein is meat, cheese, dairy, and fat also overlaps with protein, because usually fat is found within animal products. And there's also fat found in plant products as well, but predominantly, you know, fat, protein, and carbohydrates are the three major categories that we are working with. Hey, good evening, Peter Kent. We're doing good. I'm giving everybody the rundown on my diet here, since I got some requests for that, or a request for that, and I'm just happy to talk about it. So I find that a lot of people don't know the difference between their macronutrients, and at the end of the day, what I did is I have minimized carbohydrates, because carbohydrates require a lot of insulin, to metabolize them, and that, you know, amount of insulin. So if you're eating a high carbohydrate diet and taking a lot of insulin, which you would need to, then you have that frequently imbalanced scenario that that I mentioned before. And so my strategy was to reduce the percentage of my diet that was made up of carbohydrates, but because I'm still hungry and I still want to eat, well, I still need to fill up on protein and fat, which are other you know, useful macronutrients that I wanted to be able to make use of. So basically, carbohydrates, we're talking like corn, beans, potatoes, rice, pasta, bread, cereal, of just about every kind, and certainly like sweets, cakes, ice cream, candy, those are all carbs. So sugar is a type of carbohydrate, but also things like bread, pasta, corn chips, tortillas, like all of those things, anything remotely bread-y. Beer has some carbohydrates in it, although certainly it has a lot of water as well. But those are all things that fall into that category of carbohydrates. And so the diet that I follow, it is a low carbohydrate, high fat diet. So I reduce the amount of calories that I have to take insulin to metabolize, and swap those out for calories that don't require any or almost any insulin to metabolize. It's like I do an end run around the fact that my body doesn't make insulin and I don't want to inject huge quantities. So I say, okay, what macronutrients can I use to sustain myself that actually can be metabolized without having to inject insulin or as much insulin for them? And that has given me the benefit of very stable blood sugar. That has given me the benefit of maintaining body composition fairly stably. And JR, I don't know if you're still on, you asked me what kind of exercise I'm doing. Honestly, for the last since like 2012, 2013, I haven't really spent a consistent amount of time working out hard. And so right now what I do is like I'll do 50 push-ups every morning. Sometimes I'll do like some squats. I'll go for a walk like every other day, something like that. No, my diet is not high in fiber at all. My diet is basically no fiber, no plant-based products, although sometimes I'll have a little bit of green leafy vegetables here and there, onions, lettuce, mushrooms, which are not vegetables, mushrooms technically fungi, but the majority of my diet, eggs, bacon, butter, grass-fed butter, I try to do predominantly, and steak, ideally grass-fed, lamb, I eat a lot of lamb, again, mushrooms, I eat a little bit of cheese as well, and then I have, well, I shouldn't say no plants, because technically I think nuts and seeds like almonds, almond butter, chia seeds, sometimes I do that, and that's predominantly what my diet is made up of. And so I try to get about 60 to 80% of my calories are fat, which is a lot of fat. So I'm really looking at the food that I eat as a vehicle for my fat. So if I'm making some sort of soup, I'm putting a lot of butter in it, I'm putting a lot of olive oil in it, because that soup is a vehicle for the fat. The coffee that I drink, I'm putting butter in that and heavy cream, because that coffee is a vehicle for fat. And that's where I'm getting the majority of my calories from. Now, I've been doing this for about 3 years. And I can tell you that having not worked out, I've maintained muscle mass and I've maintained my body weight at a level that is, for somebody of my level of sedentariness, is remarkable. I know people who are much more active than I am who have lost muscle mass and who have their shape has changed, to put it nicely, in a less desirable way, much more so than my body has not changed. What I'm trying to say is, like, I've managed to maintain my physique even though I have not worked out nearly as much. So yes, so keto is absolutely very useful for losing weight. I would argue that the ketogenic diet, strictly speaking, where you're doing 80% fat, 20% protein, and pretty much 0% carbohydrates, that is predominantly like a weight loss. That 80-20, the traditional ketogenic diet, is a weight loss. That's the main thing you're going to get out of that diet, is weight loss and even weight maintenance. But if you kind of get to your target weight and you don't start shifting that balance to increase your protein, what happens is that you start to get skinny fat. And that's one of the things that I started to notice over this past summer, where I wasn't like really skinny fat, but I was just getting a little bit soft. And I mean, I shouldn't have been surprised. I was sitting on my butt most of the time. But when I started going back to the gym and started like squatting and deadlifting, I started to, I still wasn't taking in carbohydrates, but instead of doing 80-20 with 80% fat, 20% protein, I started doing like more 60-40, 50-60% fat, 50-60% protein. And as I increased my protein and started to then shift the balance back a little bit, because I was at a target weight that I was happy, and as I was training more to fuel the workouts and the tissue repair, basically, and the additional energy that I needed, I shifted that balance to favor protein a little bit more over just strictly the fat, but still very little to no insulin involved in this whole transaction. So yes, the ketogenic diet is good for losing weight, but if you want to kind of transition into kind of going past weight loss into improving overall fitness and health beyond just losing the weight, then once you kind of get the weight down, then shifting more towards protein is the way that I, at least from what I have seen and heard, that I would recommend. So Tiff says, so veggie because of the carbs, no veggies because of the carbs keep you eat from most. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be facetious. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking me there, Tiff. But let me just bring a couple of points to the forefront that are sort of caveats about this diet. Number one, it is not a diet that you do for like a little bit and you do it casually. If you're like shifting your body's metabolism away from carbohydrates, away from a insulin-centric diet, it is a substantial commitment. It is a substantial change. It is one that should be entered into with seriousness and with attention, and not casually. One of the biggest things that I have experienced in my own self, and that I've heard from so many other people, if you do not supplement electrolytes and you do not hydrate sufficiently, you're going to have a bad time. You're going to feel like crap. You're not going to have energy. And oftentimes for ladies, it is a little bit harder to get into, to kind of shift your metabolism away from carbohydrates than it is typically for men. And a lot of the reason I believe why this happens is because for ladies, a lot of times go on a keto diet because they want to lose weight. And so as they're shifting their calories, they're eating just like a lot of calories of fat as they get to that 80-20 dietary balance. And they're thinking, oh boy, I have too many calories. And so they're trying to cut calories while they're trying to get into a low carb way of eating. And I would recommend the opposite of that. Instead of trying to cut calories first, get situated. Don't worry about the calories. Get situated in the, get situated with the, get rid of the carbs out of the diet, and then get into then try to cut calories down from there after you've been doing it successfully and eliminating carbs for like 1 or 2 months, and you're feeling good on the diet and it's like second nature now. Then say, okay, like let's make sure that the calorie input and output are commensurate, so that and then that's when you start to lose weight. So a lot of times people look at diets as a magic wand, something that's going to just like change their life overnight, and for some people it does, but more often than not it's something that requires study and attention and supplementation, because if you don't get those supplements in you and you're not hydrating properly and you're just kind of, you know, half-assing it, for lack of a better term, it's going to be, you're going to wind up having a negative experience on it, and then that colors your perception of what the diet can actually do, when the reality is, if you don't do it with thorough, full attention, where you're tracking everything and really researching it, then you're not giving yourself the best shot that you possibly could with that. So that's kind of that's my caveat. Make sure you supplement. Make sure that you supplement well with electrolytes, and that you drink a lot of water. Those are the big things, because if you're not getting those electrolytes, you're going to start to cramp up and all this other stuff. It's ugly, because part of the thing is, when you're not eating carbohydrates, your body doesn't retain water the same way. Your body actually flushes water out much more readily, and so as you're flushing more water out, with that water is also going minerals and electrolytes that you would normally retain, because your body, which is part of the reason why people are heavier when they are eating carbohydrates. When you stop eating carbs, like after a couple of days, you'll lose a lot of water weight because of that, because it's the carbs holding the weight in your body, basically. I mean, that's not the exact scientific process of the way that it works, but ultimately that's what happens. So a ketogenic diet is a low-carb, high-fat diet. So if you only add fat to an already relatively normal diet, there is a decent amount of research that says that you're just putting more calories into your system, and that it's just going to wind up being bad for you from a health standpoint. And most of the time, most of the tests that you read about, like the most often cited evidence of fat is bad, is the Framingham study, which was done in just such a way where it took people on a standard American diet, and in the 60s, I believe it was, and they just added a whole pile of fat to everything that they were already eating, and then when those people had negative outcomes as a result of that, they said, oh, fat is bad. What they did not do, and what has not really been conclusively done, is an in-depth study of people who are eating high-fat diets that are low in carbohydrates. So I believe everybody here that I'm talking to has not had any direct experience or hasn't been doing this diet yet, and I'm going to get to your question in a second, Tiff. My advice with this, as with anything that you're doing, is to make it incremental so that it is sustainable. Make it something that becomes part of your life, that is slow and gradual, and that is building towards a progression where you kind of find that happy medium and you can keep it, rather than going to extremes and then falling off the wagon and going back and forth, because that is not good for your body. Rather than tell people, look, go straight onto a ketogenic diet, because honestly, a ketogenic diet is fairly extreme. For me, I had no problem doing that, because my diet was already quite regulated, and so it was just a matter of rearranging a few things. But for most people who are not used to doing that, a keto diet is difficult to implement. The simplest thing that I think everybody can do is to just get rid of sugar. So even if you don't want to completely overhaul your diet and you're not ready to do that, the one thing that the vegans and the keto and like everybody can agree on is like just get rid of processed sugar. So like sweet stuff, desserts, candy, soda, cake, cookies, ice cream, like that stuff. If you can get rid of simple sugars, you put yourself a significant portion of the way ahead to start with. And that's my advice, really, is to start with just knocking down those, like, take it one step at a time. Dismantle, like you're peeling that onion, you got to get one layer off at a time, one layer at a time. And I think what will happen, one of the benefits, one of the reasons why I follow this diet, is because I have energy in spades. That entire day that I was out, that I climbed that mountain with Martin, and I know that it's hard to like quantify, but like probably 8,000 to 10,000 feet of elevation gain on that day, and I ate zero food that day. I ate no breakfast. I had coffee with butter, and that generated enough energy for me to be like very, very physically active over 10,000 feet of up and down for a whole day. Hello, Sean. Good to see you here. So the diet pays big dividends if you can invest and really tune it in and dial it in properly, but it requires a lot of work. But the thing is that I've noticed is the more you start to cut the carbs down, the more the energy increases. And when the energy increases, suddenly working out is a lot simpler because it's something that you really feel like doing. And instead of thinking about it and being like, oh, I guess I should go out and exercise, it's like, hell, I can't sit still any longer. I gotta get out and move. And that's how I feel most of the time. I don't have to try to exercise. I have to force myself to do things that are sedentary because my natural state is to be in motion because I have a lot of energy. And I've eaten one meal today. And I usually eat one meal a day because of the fact that the food that I eat is so calorie dense that I don't have to eat, I'm not always snacking and I'm almost never hungry. So that is kind of, in a nutshell, why I do keto, what works about it, but I would highly advise researching it further. Reddit is a really good source of information, the R Keto, and if you're interested in bodybuilding or exercise fitness for both men and women as well, there's a lot of really good info on there, a lot of good people that are very, very helpful, and a lot of new people come in there and say, hey, I'm just getting started, and a lot of people will give you, and the FAQ on there is like seminal volume of work. There's actually another book, if you guys are interested, Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Taubes, and you can look at some of his stuff on, some of his lectures. He's been on the Joe Rogan podcast, and I believe Tim Ferriss has talked about it a lot. Also, let's see, two other books here. The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living, and then Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance. These are also books that I would highly recommend, and I'm going to link them down below for those of you who are interested. And if you need yet some further reading, I think I mentioned this last live stream, Discipline Equals Freedom Field Manual by Jocko Willink. This is a good book for literally anybody who needs motivation and who wants to really pursue a goal that is hard. It's a book written by a former Navy SEAL platoon commander who is very, very blunt, very simple, very hard-nosed, but has a lot of really, really great insight into goals and motivation. It's good medicine psychologically for anybody who's trying to pursue a goal, really. So a couple questions back. Let's see. Definitely try coffee with butter. I found it to be really filling. Like for breakfast, that's what I eat. Like my breakfast is a cup of coffee with butter. And I won't eat my first meal of the day usually until sometime around, usually after 2 p.m. is when I'll eat my first meal, like solid food of the day. And the only thing I'll have for breakfast is a cup of coffee with butter. And I'm not hungry. I'm not like starving myself and going around like kicking babies and little dogs. I use about a tablespoon or like one serving, whatever the one serving is, of butter. I get the Kerrygold, which is like kind of the wider bar, not the square bar. So it's like, I don't know, that's not the most exact measurement, but like one serving of butter. I think it's like 1 tablespoon of butter. Like you cut that little square off, and I put that in my coffee with some heavy cream and a little artificial sweetener, my one vice, and I'm good to go. And I feel full and I feel energized. It works really well. Now, Peter asked a question a minute ago about cholesterol, and there are a couple of interesting points about this. Now, I'm not trying to beg the question because, cholesterol is a significant factor in heart disease. However, my contention is, twofold. Number one, I have one variable that relates very closely to my quality of life, which is my blood sugar. And so I choose to prioritize what gives me good balanced blood sugar over literally everything else. And I refuse to believe that there is a possibility that I have a diet that gives me good energy, that allows me to be physically active and to feel good, to have clear mental processes most of the time, allows me to wake from sleeping feeling more energized, allows me to eat less food, and allows me to maintain a lower body fat and a lower blood sugar and a lower A1C, which is a cumulative blood sugar test that is taken every 3 months. It gives you like an average of your blood sugar, and the correlation between lower A1C and lower risk of heart disease is more than double the correlation between cholesterol. So basically my point is that, I prioritize what works for my blood sugar over everything else. That's number one. Number two is that there is an erroneous link between cholesterol and cardio, what I believe anyways, and is a contention that is borne out through more scholarly discussion in the books that I have here, or that I mentioned earlier, and I will link those. Again, I will link those below. Basically an argument that says cholesterol has been misunderstood. So what happens is your body uses cholesterol normally. Yes, basically, Jason, what you're saying is basically right on the money, is that cholesterol in addition to cholesterol's main purpose that we understand at this point is to respond to some sort of inflammatory event. It's like a helper crew. It goes out and builds to, kind of patch up stuff that's damaged by inflammation. And so when a person is on a normal diet where they're not used to having high amounts of fat in the blood for energy, because instead you're having high amounts of carbohydrates and glucose in the blood for energy, so you're not seeing fat in the blood as energy, the only time that you're going to see elevated levels of cholesterol is if there is a major inflammatory event that cholesterol is coming out to respond to fix. And so in most normal people with a normal diet, when they experience elevated cholesterol, that cholesterol is present as a result of an inflammatory event. And so the idea is, you have heart disease going on, because heart disease is connected with inflammation most of the time, and there is that cholesterol response to the inflammation. Therefore, heart disease and cholesterol are correlated. The problem, or the difference, is that in a low carbohydrate, high fat diet, that cholesterol is not present because of an inflammatory event. It's the same type of cholesterol in some cases, and in other cases it's actually a different subparticle of cholesterol that they don't measure for when they just do a total kind of a high level view of how much cholesterol is in your blood, which is a very incomplete picture. But the bottom line is that you're metabolizing that cholesterol for fuel. And especially if you are a person who is not pulling, and there are a couple other confounding variables. For example, if you lose a lot of weight, your metabolization of your own body fat will artificially raise your cholesterol, because those lipids that they're seeing in your blood are lipids that were formerly stored as body fat, but that are now circulating because they are being burned for fuel, which is the reason why you are losing the weight, which is, in almost every case, unless you're like doing crystal meth or something, weight loss is typically, for somebody who's overweight, weight loss is going to be inherently healthy, crystal meth aside. So at the end of the day, it's a risk management proposition that everyone needs to do. What they have found is that a lot of times when they have athletic people who are on a keto diet and who are thin, that oftentimes they will present a higher level of blood cholesterol because of that fact that their body is circulating more fat to burn to be able to support their metabolic level of activity, and the fact that they don't have a lot of stored fat leads their, and I have to research this, it's called hyper response. It's a hyper response to but basically that their body is, that they tend to upregulate the amount of fat that is in the bloodstream because the body is used to having that much accessible for the type of endeavors or activities that they're going to be taking on. So for me, what I use, and I do have high cholesterol, my doctor is uncomfortable with my cholesterol, but he also is blown away by my blood sugar. So he's kind of like, I can't recommend it to my other patients because I don't know, but at the same time, I look at you and you're in great shape. My doctor is like in I don't want to say much worse shape than I am. I don't want to be like a jerk, but like he's not super fit. He's not very healthy. And he's like, I wish I could do what you're doing with your blood sugar. And I'm like, well, you can, but you got to do this diet, which makes him really uncomfortable because it hasn't been vetted scientifically through double-blind studies. And the problem is that the research, I mean, for some, this is a problem. For me, I think it's an opportunity to experiment and to do what works. There isn't research that gives you statistical analyses that says this is what it means for everybody. The bottom line is that everybody has to make a decision based on what they value in their own life. And for me, I have type 1 diabetes, so therefore, statistically, I'm likely to live a decade less than everybody else right off the bat. So knowing that, that's what got me into climbing, that's what got me into traveling, that's what got me to live my life right out of the gate instead of saying, oh, I'm going to wait until I retire, because when I was 16, I was told, yeah, you're probably going to die before you retire. So I was like, I should probably rethink this. And with this diet, even though there are some people that scream about like, oh, animal products are bad, saturated fat is bad, blah, blah, blah. I eat nothing but animal products and saturated fat, and I'm in great shape relatively. For the amount of effort that I put into my body, I'm in very good shape. Let me put it that way. And I feel good. My blood sugar is good, and I have energy on demand at pretty much every time, and I'm able to maintain my body composition, my blood sugar levels, and all of the things that give me a tangible benefit in my life that I can experience. Now, if having all of those tangible benefits don't in some way add up to something that overshadows the negativity of maybe having more fat in your diet, if there is a problem with that, which again hasn't been established in this type of a dietary context. It's been established in a standard diet, but never in a diet that is low in carbohydrates. Because if you have an overabundance of calories, overabundance of fat in a diet that's already high in insulin and high in carbohydrates, then yes, that's detrimental, but it hasn't been shown that that is not due to the upregulation in insulin. High-fat diet, restrict any carbs you do eat to be high-fiber complex ones, which is supposed to help with high cholesterol. Yes, Peter, what you said it makes a lot of sense. Let's see. All right, so a couple comments back here. Let's see. Queen Stan McKean says, a weird question for you that I had a couple weeks ago. Was it difficult for me and my wife to get into a routine because you have type 1 and she doesn't? That's really interesting. Your boyfriend is disabled, and it's been sort of hard here and there for me to get used to his diet and routine. He is burned, so he can't sweat and also can't gain body fat. So he eats like a rabbit, and I can't eat that way. I'm just curious if that was ever an issue with you guys, or is she also on the keto diet? That is an interesting question. You're right. It's been, and I don't know that there's a nice way to answer this question other than to say that when you have a disability or a chronic illness or anything like that, there's a certain element of that where you have to kind of accept that you're different. And some people get depressed about that. Other people don't. Other people wear it as a badge of honor. For me, it's just a fact. It's like, yeah, I have, and I kind of wear it on my sleeve to make it easier on myself because I don't have to always feel bad about it, because at the end of the day, I'm dealing with reality when I say, look, I'm sorry. Like I was over at my friend's house last night. His parents were like, oh, can we feed you? They're like, one of my buddies I went to high school with, and his parents are super nice, haven't seen me in a couple of years, and like, salt of the earth people. Oh, we want to feed you, And I'm like, hey, good night, Peter. Thank you for taking the time. Good comments and good stuff there. Look forward to hearing from you and seeing more from you again. And I just had to say, look, guys, I'm sorry. I played the card. I'm like, yeah, it's the diabetes thing. I can't just. And they're like, oh, okay, that's fine. And there's a certain extent to which, that's the same way things have been to a large extent in my relationships. And I learned early on that if I tried to match my relationship and my medical condition, that ultimately I had to prioritize my medical condition, otherwise dangerous and unhealthy things would happen for me physically. I almost died once because I took too much insulin because my ex was mad because I wasn't eating a hamburger because she didn't want to eat by herself. And I mean, she was a kid, I was a kid, we were both idiots, and like I was an idiot for like not just being like, dude, like I don't have my insulin with me, I'm not going to eat with you, now isn't the right time, I can't do this. And she was just like, oh, you never eat with me and I have to eat by myself and I feel fat and I don't want to feel fat and you make me feel bad. And I was just like, okay, fine, I'll like, you know. And I took way too much insulin when I finally did take it, and it was just like a whole, you know, a series of bad events. And all that to say that, you know, when I got into my current relationship, I put you know, kind of the baseline for everything was like, look, this is how I need to live my life, because if I'm not active and if I don't eat a certain way and I don't live a certain way, it's bad for me and I'm going to die. So here's who I am, here's how I am, this is my routine, this is the way I live, and either that's cool or it's not cool. And she was able to say either, yeah, I'll join you where I can and I'll kind of meet up with you in these issues, and if I can't, like, I'll give you room to do what you want to do. And I have to say that, like, my relationship has been very unconventional in a lot of ways, because I have always prioritized jobs that allowed me either free time to be active on my own or jobs that enabled me to be very active as part of the job. And either of those have never been very well, highly paying jobs. And that's part of the reason why we lived in a trailer for a year, and my wife put up with that BS. God bless her for doing that, because she knew that, like, this is something that I needed to do, and it was hard on our relationship. But she gave me that opportunity to do that and never really got irritated at me for saying, yeah, I'm going to work in low-paying jobs, but ones that allow me to be active because it enables me to be happy. And so it's been a trade-off. And then at the same time, there are also things that, like, when I'm 35 and, like, she's living with her mother, I'm living now with my dad, going back to school to try to finally, like, get my act together so that I can have a job that will enable me to have the free time and the income to be able to really have a more traditional family setup where we're not always having to go back to parents and bounce around like this while still maintaining the time to be active and healthy. You know, that it's a hard thing to do that, and it has caused a lot of pain, it's caused a lot of tension, a lot of drama, in some cases bad feelings and fights, and you know, it's a sacrifice ultimately on everybody's part. And so that is something, I don't know that that necessarily helps, but good communication and just empowering each other to be able to say, to be honest about what works for you guys, to be able to say, look, this is what I need, and not to take it personally if you need different things, that as long as you're not preventing the other person from having what they need, that you can just say, look, you know, there are some areas where we can, you know, like where we don't always eat meals together. Like we'll do coffee together in the morning because that's the one thing that we both do, and we both tend to get up around the same time. Or I'll wait my coffee until she gets up if, you know, if I get up before her, or vice versa. When we do see each other, which is, you know, like every other week or so at this point. So, you know, we take that where we can, but like stuff with dinner, you know, she'll eat earlier with my daughter, and then, like, I'll come back from doing what I'm doing, and I'll take my daughter and put her to bed, and then I'll eat my dinner a couple hours later, but we'll hang out together. So, yeah, it can be really challenging, but communication is honestly, as much as a cop-out as that may sound like, communication is the answer to all that stuff, because as long as everybody feels comfortable saying, these are my needs, and being heard about stuff, you know, then ultimately you gotta, you know, you still each need to have routines, but you have to be honest about the fact that, okay, like, our routines are not meshing in this, you know, in this way, so you have to get together where you can, but then give each other space where you can't get together, if that makes sense. Queen of San Joaquin says, I've never been with somebody that had a disability before him, and my boyfriend has to do the same thing, and I understand he has to prioritize, but it's kind of a hard road. Yeah, and I mean, I guess the way I would look at it is, if there is an extent to which you can, in other words, if there are things that he has to do out of medical necessity that make his routine what it is, and there are things that you would prefer not to do, but that you could go either way on, if you're able to sacrifice even on a couple of key things, whatever those may be, to meet him in some area of his routine so that you share that in common, then that makes a big difference, even though it's like it's never going to be quite the same. But as moral support, that vote of confidence does make a really big difference. And to also to give you some appreciation for what it is that he has to go through, because like you can never imagine or understand what it is. And like vice versa, like I can't understand what it's like to not have diabetes, but to think about other problems or like, you know, and so the idea isn't like a whole, you know, safe spaces bubble zone where everybody has to like try to compete for greater levels of empathy. Not that is not what I'm suggesting at all, but like to be able to just be heard and say, hey, you know what, like I'm going to try to meet you in the middle and do the best that I can, and so that they can feel heard. It's not that you can always give them everything that they want, but or do everything the way that they do it, but if you can say, hey, you know what, like I don't understand, but hey, I would like to try. And so what's one thing, instead of saying, okay, like here's a list of 20 things I need, what's the one thing that maybe is the biggest problem that we could solve or that I could meet you in the middle on that would help you feel more, you know, like I'm in this with you. If there's one thing that I could do to kind of, you know, meet you there. And then, you know, ask for something in return that he can do that meets you somewhere in your routine that you need, because it's like people with disabilities, speaking from my own experience, they will use it as a cop-out, you know, because in some cases anyways, you know, I'm not saying that everybody does that, and not saying that all requests from people with disabilities are cop-outs, but like when you realize that you have a card that you can play, like I can say to anybody in any situation, including speeding tickets, which I have not done. My wife did this when I got pulled over for a speeding ticket, and she like, you know, played the diet. She like leaned over there and got in the cop's face and gave him like the speech about my diabetes and stuff. And like the cop was like, oh, all right, well, you know, be more careful or whatever. And I was just like, holy crap. Like, I mean, I was happy that I didn't get a ticket because I was like majorly at fault. I was like speeding into a work zone. Like I just totally lost track of what I was doing, and I was driving like a jerk. I totally deserved it, but she got me off the ticket. But the thing is, like, I don't think that way personally, but sometimes I've realized like I could use my diabetes as like in any situation, just be like, oh, I'm not feeling good, oh, my blood sugar, ooh, this, that, you know. And most people, because they don't know what it really means, I could turn it into this, blow it out of proportion. I could use it to get away with murder, maybe even literally in some cases. And so it's important to say, look, like you need to be accountable, and not, and I'm not saying you should frame the discussion this way, but like for lack of a better way of saying it, like you can't hide behind your disability. Like, yes, there are certain things that I need to give you because you have this specific disability, but there are things that you can still give and compromises that you can still make despite your having disability, and you need to find a way to contribute to the relationship so that we're all working with what we have to do the best that we can. That's, boy, I love giving relationship advice. I'm great at giving relationship advice. Not good at following it, though. I'm pretty bad at that. Okay, let me move on from that for a second. Sean asks, question, I am looking to purchase a flashlight for Fuji X-T2. I would like to do night portraits. Any recommendations? I was looking at Godox 862 and Nissan i40 or i60, but Nissan is too expensive. So Sean, I think what you're asking is for like a flash, or are you asking, like if you're asking about flash photography, I hate to break it to you, pal, I am the least qualified person to answer that question because I do not do anything with flash photography. If you're asking about like video lights, like what I have here, let's see, what is this? This is a Zecti, Z-E-C-T-I, video light, and this thing is actually pretty nice. I think it was like $49. It has warm and cool LEDs, so you can change the color temperature, and it's pretty handy. But honestly, if you want to do night portraits and stuff like that, you can do a lot with just like an actual flashlight, like a mag light, something that is easy to turn on and off. But for proper flash photography, I am not the guy to talk to about that. I really don't know. There's a guy named David Hobby He is on Twitter at the Strobist, and I think that his website is thestrobist.com. He has some good packages that are around like $150 to $250 or something like that, and that's what I was looking at when I was thinking about getting into flash photography. But the Fujis, there are some issues with Fujis and flash photography. I don't know exactly what they are. It has something to do with the syncing speed or ports. I don't know, because honestly, guys, I have not ever done anything resembling flash photography in all of my days. So I'm sorry, but if you're looking for info, I know David Hobby. He does. He's a Fuji X shooter, and he is also. Oh, good. Well, be careful. Don't text and drive there, Peter. Yeah, good deal on the Godox. That's good to know. Yeah, Angry Photographer might have some insight as well, although honestly, I would lean more towards Hobby, because he's like, I don't know, not trying to bag on Angry, but like the David Hobby is like, he is actually like a professional photographer, and he does like he's. I don't know. Yeah, I guess I can't really make an assessment on what Ken does or doesn't know. I believe it's David Hobby. He's the Strobist. I believe it's strobist.com is his website. Tell him I sent you. He doesn't know me from Adam's Lump, but it would be cool for him to figure out that I'm sending people there and maybe say hi. Had a funny experience. I was actually trying to get like an affiliate marketing set up with this coffee roaster. Hey, Samuel Mingo, good to see you here, sir. And I was like, yeah, you guys interested in doing like some affiliate program where I've, so kind of pitch your coffee, because like honestly their coffee is amazing and I love it. It's like literally the best part of my day. And I was like, maybe I could share that, pitch that to my YouTube audience, and they're like, sure. Can you call like I think Shopify and like set the thing up with them? I was like, dude, come on, like I don't know anything about that. Like, you gotta have your web people. And they're like, well, we can't unless you can figure out how to set up our website. Like, they wanted me to figure out how to set up their website with an affiliate link, and I was just like, nah, I can't do that, but maybe in the future. Anyways, guys, that's all I got for you this evening. It has been 96 minutes as of right now. I enjoyed this long and in-depth discussion of the third Living Vertical Photo Challenge using unsharpness. And at the beginning of the video, you can see that, those of you guys who tuned in late. Check out the first bit of it for the next photo challenge, and also then the remainder of it was predominantly a discussion of diet and a little bit about the pharmaceutical industry, type 1 diabetes, and my documentary project that I'm working on right now. I love getting questions. As I mentioned earlier in the feed too, guys, I'm probably not going to be shooting a lot of new stuff over the next like month or two for the channel, and I'm not going to be uploading as regularly. I will be happy to answer questions and do live streams like this to, kind of stay in touch and connected. But in terms of like uploading content on the regular right now is difficult for me with the workload that I have, and also because I have so many projects that I still have to edit. And instead of like doing vlogs all the time and like resetting, kind of bumping that stuff out further, I want to like get that stuff done out of the way, and that'll be that. So having said that, guys, if you have any other questions, leave them below. I got to do a video about resisting the urge to buy a camera. I'll do a live stream about that maybe sometime soon. Yeah, I enjoyed having you guys here as well. Much appreciated. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do that. Enable notifications, all that good stuff. Follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Let's connect, let's chat. Anybody who's here still who isn't already, I think most of you guys that are here are Patreon supporters, but even kicking in a little bit here helps a ton, and you get cool perks and all that helps support the work that we're doing. It's always appreciated. So have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you all so much for taking the time to tune in, check this out, and we will see you out there in the I got a question, a couple more questions. Yeah, the urges are bad. I gotta do, but see, my urge right now is the GX85 is like $500 with that tiny little pancake lens. I want that thing so bad, and I really, really don't need it. But I gotta make a video about that. I don't want to like blow my story there. King Yuzi says almost 6K subs. Any plans? I don't have any plans, but if you guys came up with an interesting thing that I could do for 6K, I would probably do that. Although I don't know if it's like makes sense to celebrate 6K, but I'm gonna celebrate it in my own way. So let me know. If you have good ideas for that. But it's been awesome chatting with you guys tonight. Drop comments. I will link the books and yeah, all that stuff below. Use my Amazon links, please. It does help me. Love you guys. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much, and I will see you all on the next video soon, hopefully. I'm looking forward to it. Oh, Peter, thank you. You're a scholar and a gentleman. Peter with the super chat. Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Good night, guys. Get him next time, AJ.